Forced to marry for land, he said, "This is duty." The Apache girl answered, "No love." But in the end, the sun was just beginning to rise over the quiet, dusty town, its golden light spilling over the rows of small houses and the wide, open fields that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. In one of these simple homes, a young Apache girl sat quietly by the window, her hands folded in her lap, watching the world wake up. Her eyes, dark and thoughtful, reflected a spirit that was far older than her years. She was aware of the expectations pressing down on her, like the weight of the heavy clay jars stacked in the corner of the kitchen, or the bundles of firewood waiting to be carried to the house. Life in her community was not easy. Every family struggled to keep their land, their home, and their dignity intact. And in this world, marriage was often less about love and more about survival. Today, however, was different. Today, a conversation awaited her that would challenge everything she believed about her freedom, her choices, and even her heart. Her family had been planning this moment for weeks, whispering in hushed tones, exchanging nods that carried unspoken agreements. She knew it was coming, though part of her had hoped it might somehow pass her by. But life rarely allowed for hope in these matters. When the man arrived, he was calm and serious, a quiet strength surrounding him like the dust that clung to the earth after a long, dry spell. He was a man shaped by responsibility, his eyes steady and thoughtful, his posture formal but not unkind. He had heard about the girl long before meeting her, about her pride, her intelligence, her determination. And though he had been taught that marriage was duty, he could not ignore the stir of curiosity in his chest as he walked toward her home. The meeting began with polite words and careful gestures. The girl's mother offered tea, her hands trembling slightly, betraying her own anxiety about the arrangement. The girl herself remained still, her gaze unwavering, though her mind raced with questions and silent protests. This was not what she had imagined for herself. She had always dreamed of freedom, of making choices for her own life. But now, here she was, facing a man she barely knew, expected to enter a union she had not chosen. When the formalities ended, the conversation turned to the matter at hand. The man's voice was steady and calm, carrying the weight of his family's expectations. "This is duty," he said simply, looking her in the eyes. It was not meant to be cruel, but it carried the weight of inevitability. He did not speak of love, of passion, or of dreams. He spoke of responsibility, of land, of agreements that had been made long before either of them had a say. The girl's heart tightened in her chest. She could feel the tension coiling inside her like a spring ready to snap. She had anticipated that words like this might be spoken, but hearing them so plainly, so matter-of-factly, struck her more deeply than she could have imagined. "No love," she replied, her voice clear and firm, carrying not anger but conviction. She would not lie to herself or to others. She could not pretend that she felt what she did not. She was honest, even if honesty came at a cost. There was a pause. The air seemed heavier, as if even the sunlight had stopped to listen. The man studied her carefully, trying to understand the depth of her resistance. He had been trained to see duty as the highest principle, but now he faced someone whose heart was guided by truth rather than expectation. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that duty alone might not be enough to navigate the complexities of human emotion. The girl's mother sighed quietly, her hands wringing a dish towel. She had hoped for a smoother path, for her daughter to accept the arrangement without question, but she understood the strength of her daughter's spirit. It was a difficult balance, trying to honor tradition while also respecting the individuality of the child she had raised. The room was filled with unspoken tensions, with the silent questions that no one dared to voice aloud. Outside, the wind stirred the dry leaves and dust along the road, carrying with it the scent of sage and the distant hum of the morning. It was a world that demanded respect, where choices were limited and survival often required compromise. Yet within the girl, There was a spark of defiance, a quiet assertion of self that refused to be extinguished. She had grown up learning the ways of her people, understanding the importance of community and family, but she had also learned that her voice mattered, even if it was often overshadowed by tradition. As the morning progressed, the conversation between the girl and the man continued in careful, measured tones. He explained the reasons behind the marriage, the importance of securing land, the expectations of their families, and the responsibilities they would both bear. She listened attentively, nodding at times, but always maintaining the boundary she had set. Her responses were thoughtful and precise, never rude, yet firm enough to make it clear that her heart was not yet, or perhaps never would be, aligned with this duty. Despite the tension, there was a subtle shift in the room. The man, for all his adherence to duty, began to notice the qualities that had been spoken of long before their meeting: her intelligence, her resilience, her unwavering sense of right and wrong. These were not just traits to admire from afar. They were qualities that demanded respect, and perhaps, over time, they might even inspire understanding. He realized that any attempt to impose a connection where there was none would fail. Respect, perhaps, could be the foundation on which something greater might be built. The girl, too, began to observe him differently. Beyond the formality and the seriousness, she saw a man who carried the weight of responsibility with dignity, who did not rush to impose his will, who seemed willing to listen even when he disagreed. It did not erase her fear or her resistance, but it added layers of nuance to the person she was being asked to trust. She could see that he was not a tyrant demanding submission. He was a man bound by circumstance, just as she was. As the morning gave way to afternoon, the family shared a simple meal together. Words were sparse, but gestures and glances spoke volumes. The girl's heart remained guarded, her mind alert, yet she could not ignore the small moments that hinted at mutual recognition. A shared joke, a gentle inquiry, a respectful nod, all of these hinted at the possibility that human connection could exist even in arrangements made under duress. When the man finally rose to leave, the girl felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. Relief that the first confrontation had ended without conflict, disappointment that her heart had not yet found the freedom it longed for. As he walked away, he turned back briefly, offering a small, almost imperceptible smile. It was an acknowledgement of her courage, of her honesty, and perhaps, in some unspoken way, of the journey they were both beginning. After he left, the girl returned to her window, watching as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows over the land that had been at the center of their conversation. She thought about the day ahead, about the choices that would need to be made, about the tension between duty and desire, between expectation and truth. She knew that her life would not be simple, that the path before her was filled with uncertainty, but she also knew that she would face it on her own terms, with honesty and courage as her guides. The house was quiet once more, save for the faint creaking of the floorboards and the distant calls of birds in the morning air. The girl's mother joined her at the window, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. There were no words needed. The shared silence carried understanding. They both knew that the road ahead would be challenging, but also that strength, integrity, and honesty would be their allies. As the day continued, the girl moved through her household duties with a sense of calm determination. She gathered firewood, tended to the animals, and prepared simple meals, each task a reminder of her resilience and her connection to her family and her land. She understood that life demanded action and responsibility, but she also knew that the choices she made, the voice she used, and the courage she displayed would shape her destiny in ways that duty alone could not. By evening, the first day of this new chapter was drawing to a close. The girl sat once more by the window, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink as the sun dipped below the horizon. She reflected on the encounter with the man, the weight of family expectations, and the strength of her own convictions. She realized that this was only the beginning, that the days ahead would be filled with challenges, negotiations, and discoveries. Yet, for the first time, she also felt a spark of possibility, a quiet recognition that even in circumstances dictated by duty, there could be room for understanding, respect, and perhaps something more. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, she whispered softly to herself, not as a declaration to anyone else, but as a promise to her own heart. I will face this on my own terms. I will honor my truth, even when the world demands otherwise. And I will not let duty alone define my life. The night settled over the town, calm yet full of unspoken tension, marking the end of the first day in a journey that would challenge hearts, test boundaries, and reveal the unexpected ways in which duty, courage, and honesty could intersect. The morning after the meeting, the Apache girl woke early as usual, the pale light of dawn stretching across her small room. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of earth and distant sage. She moved quietly, careful not to wake anyone, though the house was already stirring with life. Birds called from the trees outside, and the soft clatter of pots and pans from the kitchen reminded her that life, no matter how complicated, continued relentlessly. Despite the peaceful morning, her mind was not calm. The conversation from the day before lingered like a heavy stone in her chest. No love, she had said, her words clear, unwavering. Yet she could not stop thinking about the man and the weight of his words. This is duty. She understood what duty meant in her community. It meant responsibility, survival, loyalty to family. But it also meant sacrifice, obedience, and sometimes surrender of the heart. That thought made her stomach tighten. Could a life dictated by duty ever allow for freedom, for choice, for happiness? Meanwhile, in his own home, the man sat alone, staring at the table in front of him. Duty was a familiar companion. It had guided him through his life like an invisible hand, steering his decisions and shaping his actions. Yet now, faced with the girl's honest refusal to pretend, he felt something unfamiliar stirring inside him, a mixture of curiosity and respect, even perhaps admiration. She was not like the other girls he had known, not compliant, not quiet, not easily swayed. Her strength and honesty made him pause, questioning whether duty alone was enough to sustain a relationship, even one arranged by families. Over the next few days, the tension between the two grew, though they continued to meet under the careful watch of their families. Each encounter was polite, filled with the formalities that tradition demanded, yet beneath the surface, currents of emotion twisted and pulled at both of them. She maintained her boundaries, firm and unyielding, while he struggled to navigate the delicate balance between obligation and growing curiosity. Their conversations were careful, but charged, each word weighed with meaning, each gesture observed and interpreted. At times, she would notice a softness in his eyes, a patience in the way he listened, and she would find herself momentarily disarmed. But she reminded herself that admiration did not equal love, and duty could never replace choice. She had been raised to value her voice, to understand the importance of honesty, and she could not allow herself to forget those lessons, even in the face of quiet charm. One afternoon, a dispute arose over the land that had sparked the marriage arrangement in the first place. A neighboring family claimed rights to a portion of it, and tension grew between the households. The man had been deeply involved in handling the negotiations, and when the Apache girl learned of the situation, she felt compelled to act. Though she had no legal claim, she had grown up knowing the land intimately, its boundaries, its crops, the patterns of rain and sun that dictated planting and harvest. She approached him with cautious confidence, offering her insights and suggestions. At first, he hesitated, unsure if her input was welcome or even appropriate. But as she spoke, clearly and thoughtfully, demonstrating knowledge and insight that even he had overlooked. He realized that her presence was not a challenge to his authority, but a valuable contribution. For the first time, they found themselves working side by side, united not by affection, but by a shared interest in protecting what was rightfully theirs. The cooperation was not easy. There were disagreements, debates, moments of frustration. Yet slowly, a rhythm developed, an understanding that even in the absence of love, mutual respect could exist. During one of these meetings, a sudden summer storm swept across the fields. Rain poured down in heavy sheets, turning the dirt paths to mud and drenching the land. The man and the girl found themselves seeking shelter beneath a large oak tree, their clothes soaked, their hair plastered to their faces. She could see the seriousness in his expression, the concern for the crops, for the land, and for the people who relied on it. In that shared struggle, a subtle bond began to form. It was not the warmth of affection, but the acknowledgement of each other's capabilities and strengths, a recognition that both of them were capable, determined, and resilient. Even as the days passed, the girl continued to feel the weight of expectation pressing on her. Her family, though respectful of her courage, reminded her that the marriage could secure their land and ensure their future. Her heart rebelled against the idea of being a pawn in a transaction, yet she could not ignore the practicality of survival. The tension between her desire for independence and the demands of duty grew stronger, and she often found herself walking alone along the edge of the fields, thinking deeply about what the future might hold. The man, too, struggled with his own internal conflict. He had been raised to value duty above all else, to see marriage as a responsibility rather than a personal choice. Yet now, observing her honesty, her strength, and her unwavering principles, he found himself questioning the simplicity of duty. Was it enough to fulfill obligations if it left the heart untouched? Could respect and understanding ever grow into something deeper, even in circumstances that had begun without love? He did not have answers, only questions that haunted him as he moved through each day with careful attentiveness. One evening, as the sun set and the sky blazed with shades of orange and pink, the girl found herself walking toward the edge of the property. She paused to watch the fields shimmer in the fading light, the land stretching endlessly, both a source of pride and a reminder of the burden she carried. She thought about the man, about his calm demeanor, about the sense of duty that guided him. She did not feel love, but she recognized that beneath his formality there was a consistency, a reliability, and perhaps even a capacity for understanding that few people possessed. Meanwhile, he returned to his own home, reflecting on the day. He remembered the way she had stood her ground during the negotiations, the clarity of her mind, the courage in her voice. He realized that her resistance was not rebellion for its own sake. It was honesty, integrity, and self-respect. And though he could not ignore his obligations, he began to consider that duty and understanding might coexist. Perhaps respect could grow, perhaps trust could be earned, even if love was not yet present. The following week brought another challenge. A minor injury occurred in the field, and the girl was the first to react, rushing to provide aid and comfort. The man watched, impressed by her calmness, her ability to take action without panic. It was a small event, but it marked another step in their growing awareness of each other's character. They began to see each other not just as representatives of duty and obligation, but as individuals with strengths, skills, and values worthy of recognition. Despite these small shifts, the girl's heart remained guarded. She continued to insist on her boundaries, refusing to allow familiarity to turn into dependence or emotional compromise. She knew that survival and independence were intertwined, and she would not allow either to be compromised. The man, in turn, continued to respect her limits, learning that patience and attentiveness were as important as strength and decisiveness. In their careful dance of interaction, A foundation of mutual understanding began to emerge, fragile yet persistent. As days turned into weeks, the routine of life persisted. They continued to meet, to discuss matters of the land, to navigate the expectations of their families. They shared moments of quiet observation, of cooperation, of subtle acknowledgement. The community watched, noticing the growing competence and partnership between the two, even if the deeper emotions remained unspoken. The girl's mother occasionally offered quiet encouragement, seeing the way the man treated her daughter with respect, and recognizing that perhaps, even in the confines of duty, there was room for dignity and consideration. And yet, uncertainty remained. The girl often wondered what the future would hold, whether respect could evolve into something deeper, whether choice and duty could ever coexist. She understood that the path ahead would not be simple. But she also recognized the importance of honesty, of clarity, and of self-respect. She had begun to see that relationships, even those formed under obligation, required attention, patience, and understanding. The man, too, reflected on the changes within himself. He had begun to see that duty was not simply a set of rules to follow, but a responsibility to act with fairness, integrity, and awareness of others, humanity. He recognized the value of listening, of acknowledging strength in others, and of finding common ground where differences existed. Though love had not yet entered their story, he began to appreciate the possibility that understanding and respect could form the foundation for something meaningful in the future. As another evening settled over the town, the girl sat once more at the edge of the fields, the wind rustling through the tall grasses, carrying the scents of earth and distant pine. She thought about the challenges they had faced together, the small moments of cooperation and recognition, and the unspoken understanding that was slowly taking shape. She knew that the road ahead would be filled with questions, struggles, and choices, but she also sensed that even in a life bound by duty, there was space for honesty, respect, and growth. And as the stars began to appear in the sky, glittering softly against the darkening horizon, she allowed herself a quiet thought. Perhaps duty and integrity, when paired with understanding, could become the start of something more than obligation. Perhaps respect, even in its earliest forms, could grow into trust, partnership, and even unexpected connection. With that thought, she rose from her place, feeling the quiet strength within her. She understood that the coming days would test her patience, her courage, and her resolve. But she also knew that she would face those days with honesty, clarity, and the quiet confidence that she could navigate life on her own terms, even when duty and expectation demanded otherwise. The night settled over the town, calm yet filled with the unspoken tensions of the days to come. Both the girl and the man were aware that their journey had only begun, that the balance between duty and choice, expectation and honesty, would be tested in countless ways. And yet, in that quiet night, a fragile understanding had begun to take root, a promise, unspoken but real, that even in circumstances dictated by duty, human connection could emerge, slowly, carefully, and unexpectedly. The days that followed were quiet but filled with small, meaningful moments. The Apache girl continued to work in the fields, tending the crops, feeding the animals, and caring for the home with her usual diligence. She moved with purpose, her hands skilled from years of learning the ways of her family. Life was never simple, but she had learned to find satisfaction in small accomplishments. She took pride in her work, in the rhythms of daily life, and in the knowledge that she could manage responsibilities that many might find overwhelming. The man visited often, though always with the careful formality that duty required. At first, their conversations were brief and polite, focused on practical matters, irrigation, fences, property boundaries, and the preparation for upcoming harvests. But over time, these discussions began to change subtly. He started asking her opinion, not only because it was useful, but because he genuinely wanted to hear her perspective. He noticed details she mentioned that others might overlook: the way certain plants grew in different soils, the signs of incoming weather, and small indicators of how the land would respond to work and care. Her knowledge, honed over years of experience, impressed him deeply. She, in turn, began to notice the quiet ways he paid attention. He did not dismiss her ideas or speak over her. He acknowledged her suggestions, sometimes incorporating them into his plans, and occasionally he would pause and ask her why she thought a certain way. These moments were subtle but meaningful. She realized that despite the arrangement being founded on duty and obligation, he valued her mind and respected her abilities. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel a small sense of ease in his presence, though she remained careful not to mistake respect for love. One morning, as the sun rose softly over the fields, a small crisis unfolded. A young calf had wandered into a neighboring property, and the owners were upset, claiming it had damaged their crops. The girl immediately noticed the issue while walking through the fields. She knew that ignoring it could escalate the dispute, so she ran to find the man, explaining the situation clearly and calmly. At first he looked frustrated, but then he nodded, appreciating her promptness and her practical solution. They would retrieve the calf, ensure no further damage occurred, and offer a small apology to maintain peace. Working together to resolve the problem, they moved with efficiency. She led the way to locate the calf, and he followed, gently guiding the animal back toward their property. There was no need for words beyond what was necessary, yet a sense of cooperation filled the air. For the first time, they acted not as strangers bound by arrangement, but as partners in solving a problem. The task was mundane, practical, and entirely ordinary, yet it carried an unspoken significance. They were beginning to see each other's character in action, beyond the formal expectations of duty. After returning the calf, the man suggested they sit for a moment beneath the shade of a large tree that marked the edge of the field. He offered her a simple piece of bread from his pack, and she accepted without hesitation. They ate in silence, the sun warm on their shoulders, and for a brief moment, the tension that had marked their interactions seemed to lift. She noticed the patience in his demeanor, the way he listened when she spoke, and the careful thought he put into each decision. He noticed the clarity in her mind, the courage in her voice, and the unwavering confidence with which she expressed her opinions. It was during these small, shared experiences that the first threads of understanding began to form. Neither of them acknowledged it explicitly. There were no confessions, no declarations of emotion, but subtle gestures spoke louder than words. A glance held a little longer than necessary. A nod of agreement carried more weight. Shared laughter over a minor mishap, like a bucket tipping over or the calf refusing to move, hinted at the possibility of connection. Both of them were beginning to see that duty, while important, could coexist with something more meaningful: mutual respect. One afternoon, a heavier challenge arrived. A small storm had passed through the area the night before, leaving the fields muddy and uneven. Some of the crops were damaged, and the irrigation channels needed urgent attention. Both families looked to them for guidance, expecting solutions and leadership. The girl immediately stepped forward, assessing the situation and suggesting repairs that would prevent further loss. The man observed quietly, then offered his own ideas, and together they began to organize the work. The hours were long and tiring. They lifted, dug, and repaired, sometimes standing side by side, sometimes working in different areas but always aware of the other's efforts. Mud clung to their boots, sweat soaked their clothes, and yet neither complained. In those shared labors, they began to recognize qualities that could not be taught: perseverance, problem-solving, resilience, and the ability to act calmly under pressure. Their cooperation was not born of love, but it was the foundation upon which trust started to grow. That evening, after the work was completed, they sat quietly by the fire, their faces still smudged with dirt and exhaustion. The girl looked at the man differently now. She could see that beneath the serious, dutiful exterior, there was integrity, patience, and an unwavering commitment to doing what was right. He looked at her and saw more than a stubborn girl resisting expectation. He saw intelligence, courage, and strength of character that commanded respect. There was no romance yet, no deep emotional bond, but the seeds of mutual understanding had been planted. Days turned into weeks and the pattern continued. They met in the fields, in the kitchens, and sometimes at the edge of the land, working side by side, discussing solutions and sharing small observations about the world around them. She learned that he could be fair, reliable, and even quietly kind, though he rarely expressed these qualities openly. He learned that she could be firm, principled, and thoughtful, even when faced with challenges that demanded flexibility. Each interaction deepened their awareness of one another, though neither dared to name it. One morning, as they walked along a narrow path between the fields, they came across a small, injured bird. It had fallen from its nest, and its wing was bent awkwardly. The girl immediately knelt to examine it, gently speaking to it as she assessed the injury. The man watched quietly, impressed by her tenderness and care. Together, they fashioned a small support from twigs and cloth, carefully placing the bird in a safe spot near the trees. The act was simple, yet it revealed a shared sense of responsibility and compassion that neither had expected to find in the other. Later that afternoon, the girl's younger siblings joined them in the field. They were curious, lively, and mischievous, testing both the girl and the man with playful questions and small pranks. She guided them patiently, laughing softly at their antics. The man, initially unsure how to respond, began to relax, offering gentle corrections and joining in the small jokes. The children quickly warmed to him, sensing that beneath his serious exterior, he could be approachable and fair. The girl noticed the change, realizing that his respect extended beyond her to others as well. Through these experiences, they both began to understand an important truth. Connection did not need to begin with love. It could grow from shared effort, respect, and recognition of each other's strengths. They were learning to work together, to rely on one another, and to see the value in perspectives that were different from their own. These moments of cooperation laid the groundwork for trust, and trust, in turn, could eventually lead to something more. One evening, after a particularly long day of work, they sat on a small rise overlooking the fields. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the land, and the quiet of the evening was soothing. The girl spoke softly about her hopes for the future, not as a declaration of affection, but as a sharing of dreams and concerns. The man listened intently, nodding at times, offering thoughtful questions and reflections. The conversation flowed naturally, without the formalities that had marked their first interactions. For a brief moment, they were simply two people, observing, thinking, and sharing, without the heavy burden of expectation or duty. By the end of the week, a subtle but unmistakable change had taken place. Neither of them had declared love, and neither had compromised their principles. Yet the way they interacted had shifted. There was less tension, more ease, and a growing sense of partnership. They had begun to recognize that even in a situation rooted in obligation, connection was possible if built on respect and understanding. The bond was fragile, tentative, and unspoken, but it existed. The girl reflected on these days often, sitting quietly at the edge of the fields as the sun dipped below the horizon. She realized that the man, despite being bound by duty, had proven himself reliable, fair, and thoughtful. He had listened to her, respected her opinions, and acted with integrity. These qualities mattered, perhaps more than any romantic feeling could at that moment. She felt a cautious sense of optimism, understanding that relationships could grow in unexpected ways, and that respect could become the first step toward something deeper. The man, too, reflected on the week's events. He saw her strength, intelligence, and honesty as qualities to admire, not simply challenges to navigate. He realized that cooperation, patience, and attention to character were as important as duty itself. He began to understand that true connection required effort, understanding, and respect, and that even an arranged relationship could evolve into a meaningful partnership if both parties approached it with integrity. And so, as the stars appeared in the night sky, both the girl and the man felt a quiet acknowledgement of what had begun. There were no promises, no confessions, only a growing awareness that even in circumstances dictated by duty, trust, respect, and understanding could take root. It was a fragile beginning, but it was real. The journey ahead would not be simple, but for the first time, both of them could see the possibility of something meaningful emerging from a situation that had begun without choice, without love, but with honesty and courage. The weeks passed, and the small town continued its steady rhythm of life. The sun rose and set over the fields, and the girl and the man spent their days tending the land, managing chores, and navigating the delicate expectations of their families. Yet beneath the ordinary tasks, tension was beginning to grow. Life, as it often does, had a way of testing both patience and understanding, and the partnership that had slowly begun to form was about to face a new challenge. One morning, news arrived that a neighboring family intended to expand their holdings. They claimed that some of the land currently under the girl's family's care had been theirs historically, and demanded it back. The families gathered in a tense meeting under the shade of the large oak tree at the edge of the property. Voices rose, arguments were made, and old rivalries came to the surface. The man stood beside the girl, calm and composed, but even he could feel the pressure building. He knew that the situation required careful handling, for one wrong move could escalate the conflict and threaten both families. The girl, standing at his side, felt a surge of determination. She could see the worry in her family's eyes, the tension in the neighbors' expressions, and she knew that speaking up with clarity and courage was the only way to prevent disaster. She addressed the crowd confidently, outlining the boundaries, the history of the land, and the steps her family had taken to maintain it. Her voice was steady, her words precise, and her presence commanding. The man watched closely, impressed by the poise and clarity with which she spoke. He had seen her strength before, but this was different. She was standing not just for herself, but for her family, her community, and the land she loved. Despite her confidence, the neighbors were not easily persuaded. The argument intensified, voices rising louder and sharper. The girl felt frustration building, but she kept her composure, determined not to let anger cloud her judgment. The man, sensing that the situation could escalate dangerously, stepped forward to speak. His voice was calm and firm, commanding attention. He proposed a compromise, an agreement that respected both families' claims and maintained peace. His words were measured, showing understanding of both sides, and he carefully ensured that the girl's points were acknowledged and included. For a moment, silence fell over the group. The neighbors murmured among themselves, considering the proposal. Finally, after tense deliberation, they agreed to the compromise. Relief washed over both families, though it was tempered by the exhaustion and stress of the confrontation. The girl and the man exchanged a quiet glance, a subtle acknowledgement of their shared effort and success. They had faced a significant challenge together, and for the first time, it felt as though they were truly partners in more than just name. Yet, even in this victory, misunderstandings began to creep in. Later that afternoon, while walking back across the fields, the girl noticed that the man had lingered, speaking quietly with her father about matters she did not fully understand. She could not hear the words, but she sensed a tension in their conversation, a subtle exclusion that made her heart tighten. Though she trusted the man, A flicker of doubt and frustration sparked within her. Why had he not included her in this discussion? Did he not trust her judgment? When they returned home, the girl struggled to conceal her irritation. She spoke curtly, keeping her distance, while he sensed her mood but could not immediately understand its cause. The atmosphere was strained, the easy rhythm of cooperation disrupted by unspoken tension. Both of them, proud and principled, found it difficult to bridge the sudden gap. For the first time, the growing bond between them was tested not by external challenge, but by miscommunication and assumptions. That evening, the girl's mother noticed the distance between them. She approached her daughter gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "He respects you," she said softly. "He listens. He values what you say, even when it seems he acts alone. Trust that he means well." The girl nodded, but it was not enough to fully ease the ache of exclusion. She had always valued honesty and inclusion, and the thought that someone she was meant to rely on might make decisions without her lingered in her mind. Meanwhile, the man reflected on his own actions. He had not intended to exclude her, only to speak privately with her father to ensure clarity in the agreement. He realized, however, that his decision, though practical, had caused frustration and doubt. He resolved to address it, to rebuild the trust that had been shaken. Yet he knew it would require care, patience, and a willingness to be vulnerable, something that did not come easily to a man guided by duty and responsibility. A few days later, another challenge arose. A sudden illness affected some of the animals on the property. The girl noticed the symptoms early and quickly informed the man. Together, they worked tirelessly to care for the animals, preparing medicine, cleaning stalls, and observing for changes. The intensity of the work left them both exhausted, but it also provided an opportunity to reconnect. They spoke more openly than they had in days, acknowledging their shared frustration, their concern, and the need to work together despite misunderstandings. The crisis reminded them that collaboration, not pride, was essential for their shared responsibilities. During a brief break, sitting under the shade of a tree, the man finally addressed the earlier tension. He spoke honestly, explaining why he had spoken with her father and acknowledging the way it might have made her feel excluded. He expressed respect for her judgment and recognized the value of her contributions. The girl listened, her heart softening as she realized that his intentions had been good, even if his approach had been flawed. The moment marked a turning point. For the first time, they spoke openly about trust, communication, and respect, laying the foundation for deeper understanding. In the following days, they continued their work together, but now with a renewed sense of partnership. Misunderstandings still arose occasionally, as they always would, but both were more willing to address them directly, to listen, and to learn from one another. The rhythm of their days became more natural, their conversations more fluid, and their cooperation more effective. The trust that had begun to form in small, quiet moments now had a stronger foundation, reinforced by honesty and shared effort. One afternoon, while preparing for an upcoming community gathering, the girl noticed that the man had taken the time to ensure that her ideas for the event were included. He had listened, remembered, and acted on her suggestions, a gesture that spoke volumes. She realized that his respect extended beyond duty or obligation. It was intentional, thoughtful, and meaningful. The recognition of her voice, her skills, and her perspective created a subtle but undeniable bond between them. Later, during the gathering itself, they were able to work seamlessly together, coordinating tasks, managing responsibilities, and ensuring that everything ran smoothly. The community observed their efforts, noting the harmony and cooperation that had developed despite the initial challenges. The girl felt a quiet pride in their teamwork, and the man experienced a sense of satisfaction in seeing their combined efforts succeed. Though love had not yet been spoken, the respect and understanding between them were visible to all. As the evening drew to a close, The girl and the man found themselves walking alone along a narrow path, the cool night air carrying the faint scent of sage and earth. They spoke of small things, the work of the day, plans for the coming week, and observations about the land. The conversation was easy, comfortable, and free from the formalities that had marked their early interactions. In the quiet of the night, they both felt the growing connection between them, a sense of partnership that went beyond duty and obligation. In those moments, they began to see each other not as strangers forced into an arrangement, but as individuals capable of trust, cooperation, and understanding. They recognized the value of honesty, the importance of communication, and the subtle power of shared effort. The bond that had begun with duty was slowly evolving into something more profound, though neither dared to name it aloud. And yet, they both understood that challenges would continue. Life on the land was never simple, and the pressures of family, community, and expectation would not disappear. Misunderstandings, disagreements, and difficult choices would continue to test their partnership. But now, armed with trust, respect, and the knowledge that they could face challenges together, they were better prepared. They had learned that connection did not need to begin with love, that partnership could grow from understanding, and that even in the most unlikely circumstances, meaningful bonds could form. As they returned home that night, the stars beginning to twinkle in the clear sky above, both felt a quiet sense of hope. They had faced tension, misunderstanding, and external challenges, yet they had emerged stronger, more aware, and more capable of supporting one another. The journey was far from over, but the foundation had been laid for something that could grow into trust, friendship, and perhaps, in time, something deeper. The Apache girl lay awake that night, thinking about the events of the past weeks. She realized that her heart was still her own, that love had not yet entered her life, but that she felt a growing appreciation for the man standing beside her in the challenges of life. She understood that respect and partnership mattered, perhaps even more than affection at this stage. She felt a cautious optimism, knowing that the future held possibilities she had not yet imagined. The man, too, reflected on the day as he sat quietly by the fire. He recognized the growth in their relationship, the strength of her character, and the ways in which their cooperation had produced positive outcomes. He felt a sense of pride, not in his authority or duty, but in the partnership they had forged. He realized that respect and trust could be the beginning of something more meaningful, even in a relationship that had begun with obligation. As the night deepened, both the girl and the man understood a simple truth. Challenges, misunderstandings, and external pressures were inevitable, but how they responded to them would shape the nature of their relationship. They had faced difficulties together, learned to communicate, and discovered the value of honesty, respect, and cooperation. These lessons were more powerful than any declaration of love, for they had built a foundation that could endure whatever trials lay ahead. And so, the night settled over the land, calm yet filled with the quiet energy of growth and possibility. Both the Apache girl and the man knew that the journey was far from over, but they had taken important steps toward understanding, trust, and partnership. The bond that had begun with duty was transforming into something more substantial, resilient, and meaningful. A bond that could, in time, become the foundation for unexpected connection, respect, and perhaps, in its own way, love. The days that followed the storm and the misunderstandings passed quietly, but they carried a new energy. The Apache girl and the man moved through the routine of their lives with a sense of ease that had not existed before. Their work in the fields, care for the animals, and management of the household had not changed, but their interactions were different. There was trust now, a mutual understanding that had taken weeks of effort, conversation, and cooperation to build. The tension that had once marked every moment of their contact had softened into a rhythm of companionship, steady and reliable. One morning, As the sun rose over the fields and painted the sky with shades of gold and pink, the man approached the girl while she worked near the edge of the property. He carried a small bundle of tools he had prepared for her, a gesture that was practical but thoughtful. She looked up from her work and gave a small smile, not because of romance, but because she recognized the care in his action. It was the kind of gesture that showed respect and attentiveness, the small details that matter when two people are building a relationship founded on trust rather than obligation. The girl set her work aside, and they walked together toward the fields they had tended side by side for weeks. They spoke quietly about their tasks, sharing observations and ideas, but there was a softness in their tone, a subtle warmth that had not been present in their early meetings. It was the result of shared effort, mutual respect, and recognition of each other's strengths. Neither of them had spoken of love, and neither felt it yet, but they were beginning to appreciate the other as a partner, someone they could rely on and respect deeply. That afternoon, a minor crisis arose when a group of visitors from the neighboring town came to inspect the land. They asked questions, raised concerns, and pointed out potential issues that could affect future agreements. The girl took the lead, confidently explaining the boundaries, the care taken to maintain the crops, and the steps her family had implemented to ensure productivity. The man supported her, answering questions that required legal or technical knowledge, and together they handled the situation smoothly. Their combined efforts impressed the visitors, who left with assurances and praise. After the visitors departed, the girl and the man sat quietly under the large oak tree, exhausted but satisfied. She looked at him and noticed how much he had changed in her eyes. He was no longer simply a man bound by duty. He was someone who listened, who respected her opinions, and who worked alongside her to protect what mattered. She realized that trust and respect were more powerful than any arrangement imposed by families or tradition. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider that a meaningful bond could exist even without the initial spark of love. As the weeks passed, their partnership grew stronger. They coordinated planting and harvesting, repaired fences, and ensured the animals were well cared for. Each task, no matter how small, became an opportunity to observe and appreciate one another's qualities. She saw his patience and fairness, the way he made decisions with care and consideration. He saw her intelligence, courage, and unwavering sense of responsibility. These qualities, recognized and valued by the other, became the foundation of a bond that was quietly growing stronger with each passing day. One evening, as the sky darkened and stars appeared in the clear night, they sat together on a small rise overlooking the fields. The girl spoke softly about her dreams for the land, her family, and the future she hoped to build. The man listened carefully, nodding and offering thoughtful observations. Their conversation was easy, natural, and free from the formality that had once constrained them. In that quiet moment, they both felt the comfort of shared understanding. They did not need to speak of love. The connection between them was evident in the way they listened, respected, and supported one another. A few days later, a small celebration was held in the town to honor a successful harvest. The girl and the man worked together to prepare the space, organize the food, and welcome the guests. Their cooperation was seamless, a display of the partnership they had built. Observers commented on how well they complemented each other, noting the harmony in their efforts. The girl felt a quiet pride in their ability to work together, and the man experienced satisfaction in seeing their efforts acknowledged by the community. During the celebration, a minor incident occurred when a child stumbled near the food tables. Without hesitation, the girl rushed to help, gently steadying the child and ensuring they were unharmed. The man joined her, offering assistance and calming the adults who had gathered. The act was simple, yet it highlighted the partnership they had developed. They were not merely coexisting, they were functioning as a team, responding to challenges with efficiency, care, and respect. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, the man walked with the girl to the edge of the property. The air was cool, and the night was calm, filled with the quiet sounds of crickets and the rustling of leaves. He spoke carefully, acknowledging the courage, wisdom, and strength she had shown in handling the events of the day. He thanked her for her insight and support, and for the trust she had shown him in working together. The girl listened, her heart softening at the sincerity in his words. For the first time, she felt the depth of their mutual respect fully, recognizing that it was more than duty. It was a choice, a conscious decision to honor and value one another. Over the following days, the partnership deepened further. They shared small, quiet moments in which they observed the land, spoke of dreams, and planned for the future. She began to feel a sense of comfort in his presence, a realization that their connection could grow into something meaningful without forcing feelings prematurely. He, in turn, appreciated the clarity and integrity she brought to every interaction, understanding that her honesty was a sign of strength, not defiance. One afternoon, they discovered that a portion of the crops had been damaged by unexpected weather. Rather than allowing frustration to dominate, they approached the problem together. She suggested ways to salvage the harvest, and he implemented structural improvements to prevent future damage. Their cooperation was efficient and harmonious, demonstrating the power of trust, respect, and shared responsibility. In those moments, the line between duty and choice blurred, and their bond grew quietly but undeniably stronger. In the evenings, they sometimes sat together, watching the sunset over the fields. Words were not always necessary. Their silence was comfortable, filled with a mutual understanding that had taken weeks to develop. She reflected on the journey from resistance to cooperation, realizing that the man had earned her trust through actions, patience, and respect. He reflected on the growth of their partnership, acknowledging that their connection, though still free of romantic love, had become meaningful in its own right. One night, a gentle rain fell, soft and steady, washing over the land and filling the air with the scent of earth and growth. The girl and the man stood together beneath the shelter of the large oak tree, watching the rain fall. She spoke quietly about the beauty of the storm, the way it nourished the land, and the lessons it could teach about resilience and patience. He listened attentively, acknowledging her perspective and sharing his own observations. In that moment, they both felt the subtle shift that had occurred in their relationship, a recognition that duty, when paired with understanding and respect, could evolve into trust and care. As the weeks turned into months, their partnership continued to flourish. Tasks that had once been burdensome became opportunities for collaboration. Decisions were made together, challenges faced as a team, and successes celebrated mutually. They began to share not only responsibilities but also small joys. The first bloom of a new plant, the laughter of children playing nearby, and the quiet satisfaction of a well-maintained property. These shared experiences strengthened their bond, creating a sense of connection that went beyond obligation. One afternoon, the girl's younger siblings asked them to join a game in the fields. At first, both were hesitant, accustomed to work and responsibility, but they eventually agreed. Laughter filled the air as they played together, chasing one another, teasing gently and sharing in the joy of the moment. The girl looked at the man differently now. He was no longer just a figure of duty, but someone capable of warmth, humor, and shared happiness. He looked at her and saw a partner, someone whose strength was matched by her ability to embrace life with honesty and spirit. By the time the next harvest arrived, the transformation in their relationship was evident. Where once there had been tension, misunderstanding, and obligation, there was now cooperation, respect, and trust. The bond they had formed was not born of romantic love, but it was real, meaningful, and resilient. Both had learned to value the other's presence, to appreciate their strengths, and to support one another through challenges. Finally, one evening, as they walked along the edge of the property after a long day, the man spoke quietly. He acknowledged that what had begun as duty had evolved into something deeper: respect, trust, and the recognition of each other's value. The girl listened, her heart calm, knowing that she had also grown to appreciate his integrity, patience, and fairness. Though love had not been spoken aloud, it existed subtly, quietly in the trust, care, and partnership they had built together. As the stars appeared overhead, the girl and the man stood side by side, watching the night sky. The journey from obligation to connection was complete, not in the form of grand gestures or declarations, but in the quiet certainty that they had found something rare and valuable: a bond of mutual respect, understanding, and choice. Duty had brought them together, but it was honesty, patience, and shared effort that had transformed that obligation into a true partnership. In the end, the Apache girl smiled softly, acknowledging the journey they had taken. She realized that love could grow from unexpected places, even when it began under the weight of expectation and tradition. The man nodded beside her, silently understanding that respect, trust, and care were the foundations of a meaningful connection. Together, they faced the future, not as two individuals bound by duty, but as partners who had chosen to honor and value one another. The night settled over the fields, calm and peaceful, the air filled with the soft sounds of life continuing around them. And in that quiet moment, the girl and the man understood that they had discovered something far greater than duty. They had discovered the power of choice, respect, and trust, and the possibility that even the most unexpected beginnings could lead to meaningful, lasting connection.